The banquet hall of Corvain Keep had never burned so bright. Sable Renwick pressed her spine against the cold stone of the minstrel gallery, her fingers white-knuckled on the iron railing as she stared down at the spectacle below. 300 wolves filled the vaulted chamber. Crystal goblets caught the firelight. Roasted venison and honeyed wine perfumed the air so thickly she could taste it from above, and every voice in that glittering crowd was raised in laughter and celebration. None of them were celebrating her. Tonight was the Feast of Ascension, the annual gathering where Alpha King Cauldron Ashgrove reaffirmed his alliances, honored his warriors, and reminded every pack in the realm who held dominion over their world. It was also, by cruel accident of the calendar, the 6th day of the harvest moon. Sable's birthday. She had stopped expecting him to remember after the 3rd year. By the 4th, she had stopped hoping. By the 5th, she had stopped mentioning it altogether, swallowing the date like a stone and letting it sink to the bottom of her chest where all the other unspoken things had gathered. But the 6th year was different. The 6th year, Cauldron had promised. "This time I will not forget," he had told her 3 weeks ago, his voice low and certain in the darkness of their private chamber. His thumb had traced the faded claiming mark on her collarbone, the bite he had given her the night he declared her his fated mate, his Luna, his forever. "I swear it on my wolf, Sable. This year, I will make it right." She had believed him. Again. Now she watched him from the gallery above, searching his face for any flicker of remembrance. The Alpha King stood at the head of the long table, impossibly commanding in black leather and silver thread, his storm-gray eyes sweeping the hall with the easy authority of a man born to rule. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. His dark auburn hair was pushed back from his forehead. When he smiled at something his beta whispered, the wolves nearest to him leaned closer as if drawn by gravity. He was magnetic. He was magnificent. And he had no idea what day it was. Sable's gaze drifted to the woman seated at Cauldron's right hand. Nerissa Blackthorn, daughter of the most powerful noble house in the eastern provinces, commander of 2,000 sworn swords, and the woman the Elder Council had spent 6 years insisting should have been chosen as Luna instead of a nobody healer with no bloodline and no political value. Nerissa leaned toward Cauldron to speak into his ear. Her fingers brushed his forearm. He did not pull away. Something small and fragile cracked behind Sable's ribs. She pressed her hand to the claiming mark on her collarbone. It had been fading for months, growing paler, losing the raised texture that once proclaimed to every wolf who saw it that she belonged to the most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms. She had told herself it was normal, that 6-year-old scars simply aged. But claiming marks were not supposed to fade at all. Not unless the bond was dying. 6 years. She had given him 6 years. Sable remembered the night they met with a clarity that hurt more than the forgetting. She had been a field healer traveling with the southern border patrols. Nobody important, nobody powerful, just a woman with steady hands and a gift for pulling wolves back from the edge of death. Cauldron had been brought to her tent half dead, 3 poisoned arrows buried in his flank, his wolf form shuddering with each labored breath. She had saved his life. He had opened his eyes, looked at her, and spoken a single word. Mine. The bond had ignited between them like a wildfire, undeniable, absolute. He had claimed her that same week, sinking his teeth into her collarbone while the moon hung heavy and golden above the border camp. He had carried her back to Corvain Keep and declared her Luna before the assembled packs. The Elder Council had objected. Nerissa's father, Lord Osric Blackthorn, had raged publicly. A healer with no house, no army, no political weight. It was an insult to every noble bloodline in the realm. But Cauldron had held firm. For a while. The first birthday he forgot, Sable had forgiven him. A border skirmish demanded his attention. The second, she made excuses. The trade negotiations with the Western clans had consumed him. The third, fourth, fifth. Each one eroded something she could not name, leaving behind a hollowness that grew wider with every passing year. It was never cruelty. That was the worst part. Cauldron was never cruel. He was simply absent, pulled away by the council, by politics, by the endless weight of the crown. And each time he drifted, Nerissa Blackthorn was there to fill the space Sable left empty. Sable had set a single candle on the windowsill of her chamber before coming to the gallery. One small flame in a room no one would visit. A private ritual she had performed for 3 years running, singing the old healer's birthday hymn to herself, alone, because no one else would sing it for her. This year she had set out 2 candles, one for herself, one for the secret growing beneath her heart. 7 weeks. She had known for 7 weeks that she carried Cauldron's child, and she had told no one. Not Cauldron, not Marin, the old kitchen matron who was the closest thing Sable had to a friend in this stone fortress. Not even the midwife she had quietly visited in the lower town, giving a false name and paying in copper so no one would connect the Alpha King's Luna to the nervous young woman asking about the early signs of pregnancy. She had been waiting for tonight, for the birthday he had sworn to remember. She had planned to tell him when he came to her. Imagined the words so many times they had worn grooves in her mind. She would take his hand, press it to her belly, and watch his face transform from confusion to wonder to that fierce, blazing joy she had fallen in love with 6 years ago. But midnight was approaching, and Cauldron had not looked up once. Below, Nerissa laughed at something the Alpha King said. Her hand found his arm again, lingering this time. Cauldron turned to face her fully, and for one terrible moment his expression softened in a way Sable recognized. She had seen that look before. He used to give it to her. The claiming mark on her collarbone pulsed with a dull, sick ache. Not the warm throb of a healthy bond. This was cold, distant, like pressing her ear to a door and hearing only silence on the other side. "Happy birthday to me," Sable whispered to the empty gallery. A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, angry at herself for crying, angrier at herself for still caring. 6 years of being invisible in her own home. 6 years of watching the council chip away at Cauldron's devotion, replacing her presence at his side with Nerissa's. One state dinner, one diplomatic meeting, one whispered suggestion at a time. And now this. The final promise. Broken like all the others. Sable turned from the railing. She would go back to her chamber. She would blow out the 2 candles. She would lie in the dark with her hand on her belly and decide what kind of mother she wanted to be. The kind who stayed and taught her child that love meant being forgotten, or the kind who left and taught her child that love meant knowing when to let go. She made it 3 steps before a voice from the hall below froze her blood. "A toast!" Lord Osric Blackthorn's voice boomed across the banquet hall, silencing the crowd. "To the Alpha King and his future, may the alliance between House Ashgrove and House Blackthorn be sealed before the year's end." Cheers erupted, goblets rose, and through the roar, Sable heard Cauldron's voice, not objecting, not correcting, not reminding 300 wolves that he already had a Luna, laughing. The claiming mark on her collarbone went cold, completely, utterly cold, as if the ember that had kept it alive for 6 years had finally been snuffed out. Sable did not cry again. Something beyond tears had settled into her chest, a stillness that felt less like peace and more like the moment before a bone snaps. She descended the gallery stairs and walked toward her chamber, toward the 2 candles, toward the decision that would change everything. She did not see Cauldron's hand pause mid-reach for his goblet, did not see his head snap toward the gallery, his nostrils flaring, his gray eyes flooding with sudden amber as his wolf surged forward with a howl of warning that only he could hear. She did not see him rise from his chair so abruptly that his wine spilled like blood across the white linen. By the time he reached the gallery, Sable was already gone. Sable packed with the precision of a healer preparing for surgery. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Every item chosen for survival, nothing kept for sentiment. 3 dresses, practical wool, not the silks Cauldron had gifted her that still hung untouched in the wardrobe. Her grandmother's bone-handled knife, the leather satchel of dried herbs and tinctures that had been her livelihood before she became Luna. A pouch of silver coins she had saved from the household allowance, enough to buy passage and a few months of anonymity. She paused at the mirror. The claiming mark on her collarbone was barely visible now, a ghost of the scar that had once gleamed silver-white against her brown skin. She pressed 2 fingers to it and felt nothing. No warmth, no pulse, no echo of the man who had branded her with his teeth and sworn she was his destiny. Her other hand rested on her belly. Flat still, too early to show, but she could feel the difference in her own body. A fullness. A second heartbeat fluttering beneath her own like a moth trapped under glass. "We deserve more than this," she whispered. "Both of us." She left the 2 candles burning on the windowsill. Let them be the only evidence that someone had tried to celebrate in this room tonight. Let Cauldron find them and wonder. Or more likely, let a servant clear them away in the morning without a second thought. Sable slipped through the eastern servants' passage, the one that led past the kitchens and out through the grain cellars to the postern gate. She had mapped this route months ago, not because she had planned to leave, but because a healer always identified exits. It was instinct. Tonight, instinct saved her. The postern gate guard was asleep, chin on chest, an empty flask of barley wine at his feet. Sable stepped over his outstretched legs and into the freezing night. She did not look back at Corvain Keep. She did not allow herself that luxury. 4 days of walking brought her to the coast. A fishing vessel carried her south across the Grey Channel for the price of healing the captain's infected tooth. From the southern port of Ealdmouth, she traveled inland by cart, then by foot, deeper into the Greymire lowlands, a stretch of marsh and ancient forest so sparsely populated that even the Alpha King's reach grew thin. She found the village of Dunhallow on the 5th day. 40 houses, a mill, a tavern, no healer. "My name is Wren Ashwell," she told the village elder, a stooped woman named Odara who smelled of pipe smoke and peat. "I am a widow. I can set bones, brew remedies, and deliver children." Odara studied her for a long moment, her rheumy eyes sharp despite their cloudiness. "You are running from something, girl." It was not a question. "I am running towards something," Sable corrected quietly. "A life where I matter." Odara gave her the abandoned cottage at the edge of the marshes. It had a leaking roof, a stone hearth, and a garden so overgrown that Sable spent the first week just clearing enough space to plant her medicinal herbs. She worked. She healed. She built a life out of nothing, the way she had done before Cauldron Ashgrove had swept through her world and rearranged it around himself. 3 months passed. The roof no longer leaked. The garden bloomed with feverfew and comfrey and wild sage. The villagers of Dunhallow brought her their sick children, their aching joints, their festering cuts, and she tended them all with the same steady hands that had once pulled an Alpha King back from the edge of death. Her belly swelled. The village midwife, a cheerful woman named Brielle, declared the pregnancy healthy and strong, though she clucked her tongue at Sable's size. "Big for 4 months," Brielle observed. "Could be you are carrying 2 blessings instead of 1. Sable smiled and said nothing. But alone at night, with her hands pressed to the taut curve of her stomach, she felt movements that came from opposite sides simultaneously. 2 distinct lives tumbling over each other in the dark. And on her collarbone, the mark that should have vanished entirely continued to burn with a low, stubborn heat that defied everything she understood about broken bonds. The first rumor arrived with the seed merchant in early spring. "Mad," he said to a cluster of villagers outside the tavern, his voice carrying to where Sable knelt in her garden, pulling weeds with dirt-caked fingers. Completely mad, the Alpha King has emptied the royal treasury offering bounties for information. His wolves patrol every road from the northern mountains to the southern coast. They question everyone, traders, travelers, shepherds, looking for a woman no one can identify. Sable's hands stilled in the soil. A weed dangled from her grip, roots trailing dirt like dark veins. "What woman?" asked Hald, the village blacksmith, his thick arms folded across his chest. "That is the mystery. No name given. No description beyond what his wolves carry in their heads. Something about a scent, a bond trace. They say the king's own wolf has not rested since the winter solstice, that he shifts in the middle of council meetings and runs for the hills, and his guard can barely drag him back." The seed merchant leaned in conspiratorially. "They say the crops have begun to wither in the eastern provinces. The livestock sicken without cause. The packlands are rotting from the inside, as if the land itself feels what the king feels." Sable rose from her garden on unsteady legs. She brushed the dirt from her knees and walked inside her cottage, closing the door carefully behind her before her expression could betray her. She sank into her chair. Her hand found her belly, where one of the twins delivered a sharp kick, as if punctuating the news. He was searching for her. 3 months of silence, and now this. Why? He had let her fade for 6 years, had let the council erode her position, had let Nerissa fill the space beside him without objection, had laughed at Osric's toast while Sable stood in the shadows carrying his child. Why would he tear his kingdom apart for a woman he had already lost through neglect? Unless the neglect had not been entirely his choice. The thought surfaced unbidden, and Sable pushed it down immediately. She could not afford hope. Hope was the cruelest medicine. It eased the pain while the wound festered beneath. But the mark on her collarbone would not let her forget. It burned now with a persistence that kept her awake past midnight, throbbing in rhythm with a heartbeat that was not her own. Among their kind, a rejected mate's mark dissolved completely within weeks. Hers had been fading for months before she left, but it had never disappeared. And since she arrived in Dunhallow, it had grown warmer, not cooler, as if distance had done the opposite of what it should have done, as if something was fighting to keep the bond alive. 2 weeks after the seed merchant's visit, the wolves came. Sable was hanging laundry behind her cottage when she smelled them. Musk and pine and the electric tang of shifted wolves running hard. She turned slowly, a damp bedsheet still clutched in her hands. 3 wolves stood at the edge of the marshland, just where the solid ground gave way to reeds and black water. They were enormous, gray and tawny and soot-black, their amber eyes fixed on her cottage with a focused intelligence that no natural animal possessed. Royal patrol wolves. She recognized the disciplined formation, the way they held position without twitching, awaiting orders from someone she could not see. The mark on her collarbone ignited. Not the dull burn she had grown accustomed to. This was a searing flare that buckled her knees and tore a gasp from her throat. She dropped the bedsheet into the mud and pressed both hands to her neck as heat radiated down her chest and into her arms. And beneath the pain, for the first time in months, she felt him. Not a memory, not an echo. A living presence pushing against the edges of her mind with a desperation so raw it made her teeth ache. A single emotion, transmitted through whatever remained of their bond, blazing through her like a signal fire across a dark ocean. "Where are you? Where are you? Where are you?" The words were not words. They were sensation. A clawing, frantic need that vibrated through every nerve in her body. The babies responded instantly, both of them kicking violently, as if recognizing their father's energy even from across the realm. Sable stumbled inside and barred the door. She leaned against it, breathing hard, her heart slamming against her ribs. He was getting closer. And the bond she had believed was dying was very much alive. The knock came at dawn. 3 measured strikes, deliberate, unhurried. Nothing like the frantic pounding Sable had dreaded through a sleepless night. She took the iron poker from the hearth and opened the door. A woman stood on her threshold. Tall, lean, weathered by decades of service, with close-cropped silver hair and a scar that ran from her left temple to the corner of her jaw. Her eyes were pale amber, almost gold, and they swept over Sable with the clinical precision of someone cataloging every detail. "Mistress Ashwell," the woman said, using Sable's false name without inflection. "My name is Corith. I serve as the right hand to the Alpha King of Corvain." Sable tightened her grip on the poker. "I think you have the wrong cottage." Corith's gaze dropped to Sable's belly, then rose to the mark on her collarbone, visible above the neckline of her dress. "You are Sable Renwick, Luna of Corvain, bonded mate to Cauldron Ashgrove. You carry his heirs, and you are in considerably more danger than you realize." The poker trembled in Sable's hand. "How did you find me?" "The bond trace. It has been growing stronger for weeks. The king can feel your general direction but not your precise location. Not yet. I am better at narrowing things down." Corith paused. "May I come inside? What I have to tell you should not be heard by the wolves watching from the marsh." Sable glanced past Corith toward the tree line. The 3 patrol wolves were gone. In their place, further back among the reeds, she caught a flicker of movement. Different wolves. Darker. Watching with a stillness that felt predatory rather than disciplined. She stepped aside. Corith entered and surveyed the cottage with the same efficient sweep. When she spoke, her voice was low and direct. "The king did not forget your birthday, Sable." The words landed like a slap. Sable lowered herself into a chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. "I was there. I watched him laugh and drink and never once. You watched a man under the influence of a compound called Severin's tincture." Corith remained standing, hands clasped behind her back. "It is derived from nightshade and ground moonsbane root, nearly undetectable in spiced wine. It does not control the victim. It dulls the bond, suppresses the wolf's instincts, creates a fog over the emotional centers of the mind that makes the affected person agreeable, suggestible, and incapable of recognizing their own mate." Sable's blood chilled. That is not possible. Someone would have noticed. Someone did. 3 days after the Feast of Ascension, the king collapsed during a council session. Seizures, vomiting. His wolf forced a shift so violent it cracked 2 of his ribs. When the effects of the compound finally cleared, the first word out of his mouth was your name. Corith's expression did not change, but something in her voice hardened. "He ran to your chambers in bare feet, still bleeding from the shift. He found 2 burned-down candles on a windowsill and an empty wardrobe. He put his fist through the stone wall hard enough to shatter every bone in his hand. Then he ordered every wolf in the kingdom to begin searching." Sable realized she was shaking. Her hands had found her belly, cradling the lives inside her, and she could not make them stop trembling. "Who did this?" she asked. "House Blackthorn. We are certain now, though proving it has taken months. Lord Osric has been administering the tincture in small doses for over a year. Not enough to trigger a dramatic reaction, but enough to gradually weaken the bond between you and the king. Enough to make him distracted, forgetful, emotionally distant." Corith paused. "Enough to make him forget the things that mattered most to him." 6 years. 6 birthdays. 6 slow, deliberate erosions of the man she loved. Not negligence, but poisoning. Not indifference, but sabotage. The fading mark. Sable breathed, her fingers flying to her collarbone. The way it grew colder. Artificial suppression. The bond was never weakening on its own. Osric was killing it chemically. 1 dose at a time. When you left, the king stopped attending Blackthorn-hosted dinners, stopped drinking their wine. The tincture cleared his system within days. The bond roared back to life. But you were gone. Corith withdrew a folded parchment from inside her coat. This was intercepted by our agents 4 days ago. It was carried by a blackthorn courier heading south. Sable unfolded it with numb fingers. The blackthorn seal, a serpent coiled around a thorn branch, was stamped into dark wax. The message was 3 lines. The healer has been located in the southern lowlands. Eliminate her before the king's wolves arrive. The succession must remain uncontested. Assassins, Sable whispered. Already dispatched, Korith confirmed. Which is why those wolves at the tree line are not ours. She turned toward the window. We have very little time, my lady. The king is 2 days' ride from here, moving as fast as he can. But the blackthorn killers are closer. As if answering her words, a howl rose from the marshes. Low, predatory. Nothing like the disciplined signal calls of royal patrol wolves. The babies kicked in unison, and the mark on Sable's collarbone blazed like a lit coal against her skin. The first arrow came through the kitchen window. It buried itself in the wall behind Sable's head with a sound like a butcher's cleaver striking bone. Dark liquid glistened along the shaft. Not blood, but poison. Nightshade concentrate, if the smell was any guide. Enough to kill a shifted wolf in minutes. More than enough to kill a pregnant woman in seconds. Korith moved before the glass finished falling. She seized Sable by the arm and hauled her below the window line as a second arrow punched through the wooden door, showering splinters across the floor. How many? Sable gasped. Korith's nostrils flared, scenting the air through the broken window. 8 wolves, 2 archers in human form. They have surrounded the cottage. A third arrow shrieked through the gap where the door hung crooked on its hinges. This one struck the hearth and shattered, spraying dark venom across the stones, where it hissed and smoked against the heat. They are not trying to capture you, Korith said flatly. This is an execution. Outside, the sounds of violence erupted. Korith's 2 escort wolves, Sable had not even seen them arrive, had engaged the blackthorn attackers. Snarling, the crack of jaws on bone, a yelp of pain cut short. The sounds were brutal and brief. Then silence. Korith's jaw tightened. My wolves are down. They were alone. Sable pressed her back against the wall, both hands wrapped around her belly. The twins were frantic inside her, rolling and kicking as if they could feel the danger pressing in from every side. There was nowhere to run. Every door and window was a kill lane. A shadow filled the doorway, a wolf the color of charcoal with eyes like polished copper, its lips pulled back over teeth still wet with blood. Behind it, a second wolf squeezed through the shattered kitchen window, and a third was clawing through the rear wall. Korith shifted. The transformation was violent and fast. One moment a woman, the next a rangy silver wolf that launched itself at the charcoal beast in the doorway. They collided with a sound like a thunderclap, and then the cottage was full of teeth and fury and flying debris. Sable scrambled into the corner. A wolf, she could not tell whose, crashed into the table, sending her herb jars shattering across the floor. The air filled with the scent of crushed comfrey and sage and blood, so much blood. And through it all she could hear Korith fighting with the savage efficiency of a wolf 3 decades in service to the crown. But Korith was one, and they were many. The silver wolf was thrown against the far wall with devastating force. Korith's wolf form crumpled, struggling to rise, her left foreleg hanging at a wrong angle. 2 blackthorn wolves circled her with patient menace, cutting off her escape. A figure stepped through the ruined doorway, human, female. A longbow drawn, the arrow aimed directly at Sable's chest. The woman wore a leather mask dyed the deep crimson of House Blackthorn, and her voice carried the clipped precision of a professional killer. Lord Osric sends his regards, Luna. Your bloodline ends tonight. Sable looked at the arrow pointed at her heart, looked at Korith's broken form, looked at the wolves closing in with their copper eyes and their bloodied muzzles. And something inside her that had been locked away for her entire life finally broke open. Not broke apart. Broke open. The power erupted from a place deeper than instinct. It rose from her belly, from the twin lives she carried, from a wellspring she had spent 30 years pretending did not exist, because every healer in her grandmother's line had warned her, "Hide this gift. Never let them see what you truly are." Light poured from her hands, not the gentle amber glow she used to mend cuts and set bones. This was white, blinding, radiant as a collapsing star. It swept outward from her body in a wave that shook the walls and rattled the remaining glass from every window. The blackthorn wolves recoiled. The one nearest to Korith yelped and scrambled backward, its fur smoking where the light had touched it. The archer's bowstring snapped with a sharp twang, the arrow clattering harmlessly to the floor. Sable stood. The light blazed around her like a living thing, pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeats of her children. She crossed the destroyed room to where Korith lay and pressed her luminous hands to the right hand's shattered foreleg. Bone ground against bone and fused. Torn muscle knitted shut. Korith gasped, a sound that was half agony, half wonder, and surged to her feet, whole again. "Go," Sable commanded, and her voice carried harmonics that were not entirely human. "All of you, tell Osric Blackthorn that the woman he tried to erase is not as powerless as he believed." Two of the wolves fled. A third hesitated, then bolted after them. But the archer did not run. She drew a short blade from her belt, silver-edged, gleaming with the telltale sheen of moonsbane coating, and lunged. Sable's power flared to meet her, and then the world split open. A roar erupted from the marshes, not a howl, something far more primal, a sound that vibrated in Sable's marrow and turned her blood to lightning. The ground shook. Trees at the edge of the property snapped like dry kindling. The remaining blackthorn wolves scattered in blind panic, their formation dissolving into pure animal terror. Something was coming through the darkness, something enormous, something that burned with a fury so vast it bent the air around it like heat from a forge. The archer turned to face the sound. She was not fast enough. The wolf that exploded from the tree line was unlike anything Sable had ever seen. She had watched Cauldron shift 100 times, had memorized the dark auburn of his wolf's coat, the powerful shoulders, the storm-gray eyes that carried the same quiet intensity in animal form as they did in human. She knew his wolf the way she knew her own heartbeat. Intimately, instinctively, completely. This was not that wolf. This wolf was monstrous. Twice the size she remembered, his fur so dark it seemed to consume the moonlight rather than reflect it. His eyes blazed not gray but molten gold, and the muscles beneath his coat rippled with a barely contained violence that spoke of an animal that had been fighting for dominance over its human half for months and was very nearly winning. He crossed the clearing in 2 bounds. His massive form slammed into the archer with the force of a landslide, sending her sprawling into the darkness of the marshes. She did not get up. Then he turned. Those burning gold eyes found Sable through the wreckage of her cottage, and the wolf went utterly still. Every muscle locked, his massive head lowered. A sound escaped his throat. Not a growl, not a whimper, but something between the two that resonated with such raw anguish it made Sable's knees buckle. The shift happened in a breath. One moment, a creature of nightmare stood before her. The next, a man knelt in the mud and blood and shattered glass, barefoot, wearing only torn breeches, his body covered in scars that had not been there 3 months ago. The marks of a wolf at war with itself, Sable realized. Deep gouges raked across his ribs and shoulders, where his animal half had fought savagely against his human restraint, desperate to break free and find her. Cauldron looked up at her. The Alpha King of Corvain, ruler of 5 kingdoms, commander of 10,000 wolves, looked up at her from his knees with tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. His eyes found her belly. The breath left his body as if he had been struck. "Sable," he said, just her name. But the way he said it, as if the word itself was the only thing keeping him tethered to sanity, shattered every wall she had built in 3 months of exile. His hand reached toward her stomach, stopped, hovered there, trembling, inches from the swell where his children grew. "May I?" he whispered. 2 words. The most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms, asking permission to touch his own mate. His voice cracked on the second word, and Sable watched a tear fall from his jaw and disappear into the mud. She should have refused. Should have made him earn this moment with explanations and apologies, and the kind of groveling that 6 years demanded. Instead, she took his hand and pressed it to her belly. Both babies kicked. Hard. From opposite sides, as if competing to reach their father's palm first. Cauldron made a broken sound, half laugh, half sob, and flattened his hand against her, his fingers spreading wide to feel every movement. 2, he breathed. There are 2 of them. Yes. How long have you known? Since before I left. The words hit him like a physical blow. His hand flinched against her belly, and she watched the realization crash through his expression. She had been planning to tell him that night. The night of the feast. The birthday he could not remember because Osric Blackthorn had stolen his mind with poison. "I was going to tell you," Sable said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. Cold, even. The anger was rising now, climbing up through the tenderness like frost creeping over glass. "I had the words rehearsed. I was going to take your hand, just like this, and press it here, just like this, and watch your face when you understood." She pulled his hand away, stepped backward, let the cold air fill the space between them. "Instead, I watched you laugh at Osric's toast. I watched Nerissa touch your arm. I watched you look at her the way you used to look at me. Sable, I was drugged. Korith told you. Korith told me about the feast night. One night. But what about the 5 years before that, Cauldron?" Her voice rose, sharp as broken glass. "What about every birthday you forgot? Every council meeting where you let them push me aside? Every state dinner where Nerissa sat in my chair while I ate alone in our chambers? Was that the poison too?" Cauldron flinched. "The tincture. Korith said Osric had been administering it for over a year. A year, not 6. Sable's eyes burned. "You had 5 years of clear-headed choices, and you chose to let me disappear long before I actually left." The silence between them was devastating. Cauldron rose to his feet slowly, as if his body weighed more than he could bear. "You are right," he said quietly. Sable blinked. She had expected denial, justification, the political explanations she had heard 100 times. "The council demands it, the alliances require it. You must understand." She had not expected surrender. "The poison made it worse," Cauldron continued, his voice raw. "But you are right that it did not create the problem. I let the crown consume me. I let the council convince me that strength meant hardness, that ruling meant sacrifice, that the things that mattered most to me could wait because they would always be there." His voice cracked. "You were always there, until you were not. Do not make this my fault. I am not." He stepped toward her. She stepped back. He stopped, honoring the distance she demanded. "I am saying that I failed you long before Osric Blackthorn ever poured poison into my wine. I am saying that even without the tincture, I was losing you, and I was too blinded by duty to see it." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and undecorated. No excuses, no politics. Just a man standing in the wreckage of his choices, offering her the one thing no one had ever given her in 6 years at Corvain Keep. The truth. "I felt the bond die," Sable whispered. "That night, standing in the gallery, the mark went cold and I thought you had finally stopped wanting me." Cauldron's expression shattered. "I have never stopped wanting you, not for a single breath. My wolf has been clawing me apart from the inside for 3 months, Because every instinct I possess is screaming that my mate is out there, alone, carrying my children, and I cannot reach her." He tore open the collar of his shirt, exposing his chest. Claw marks, deep, ragged, carved by a wolf tearing against its own cage, crisscrossed his skin from collarbone to hip. "This is what your absence does to me, Sable. This is what losing you looks like." A sob broke from her throat before she could catch it. She pressed her hand to her mouth, but the grief was too vast, too old, built from 6 years of silence and loneliness, and the desperate hope she had kept alive long past the point of reason. "I loved you every single day," she choked out. "Every day you forgot me, I loved you. Every dinner I ate alone, every ceremony where I stood in the shadows. I loved you so much it felt like dying, and you never even noticed." Cauldron closed the distance between them. This time, she did not step back. His hands found her face, gently, so gently, as if she were made of something precious and infinitely breakable. "I notice now," he said. "I see you now. And I swear on the lives growing inside you, I will spend every remaining day of my existence making sure you never feel invisible again." He pressed his forehead to hers. Through the bond that was blazing now, roaring back to life with a ferocity that made her gasp, she felt the truth of his words like sunlight breaking through a winter sky. He meant it, every syllable, not because the poison had been cleared, not because his wolf demanded it, but because standing in the ruins of her cottage with her tear-streaked face between his hands, Cauldron Ashgrove finally understood what he had almost destroyed, and he was terrified. "I love you," he said, the first time he had ever spoken the words aloud. "I have always loved you, and I am so sorry it took losing you to make me say it." They rode through the night. Cauldron's war horse was a beast bred for endurance, and Sable sat before him in the saddle, his arm locked around her waist, his cloak wrapped over both of them against the biting wind. Behind them, Korath and a column of 60 royal wolves ran in formation, their paws drumming the frozen ground like a war cadence. Sable had protested the arrangement. Cauldron had lifted her onto the saddle without a word and swung up behind her, his chest pressed to her back, his heartbeat steady against her spine. "My wolf cannot tolerate distance from you right now," he had said, his voice rough against her ear. 3 months nearly killed us both. Give me this." She had relented. Not because she had forgiven him. Forgiveness was a country she could see on the horizon but had not yet reached. But because her body recognized his, the way a river recognizes the sea. The twins settled the moment his warmth surrounded her, their frantic movements easing into a calm she had not felt since leaving Corvain. As they rode, Cauldron told her everything. He told her about waking from the poison's grip to find her chambers empty. The 2 candles, burned to nothing, wax pooled on the windowsill like frozen tears. How he had pressed his face into her pillow and breathed in the fading scent of her until his wolf howled itself raw. He told her about the search. Every wolf deployed, every road watched, every village questioned. The sleepless weeks that blurred into months, knowing his mate was out there, knowing his children, though he had not known about them then, were growing without him. He told her about Nerissa, how she had appeared at his chambers the night after the feast, dressed in ceremonial white, expecting to consummate the alliance Osric's toast had implied. How he had looked at her with the fog still clearing from his mind and felt nothing. How he had ordered her confined to her family's guest quarters pending investigation. "She wept," Cauldron said. "Told me I was humiliating her. That the kingdom expected us to bond. That I was destroying the alliance her father had spent years building." "Were you tempted?" Sable asked, and hated herself for needing to know. "I would sooner tear out my own throat." His arm tightened around her. "There is no version of my life that includes anyone but you, Sable. There never was. The poison made me blind, but it could not make me love another. That is not how true bonds work. His hand found her belly beneath the cloak, palm flat against the taut skin. One of the twins shifted lazily against his touch, and Sable felt his breath catch against her hair. "I miss this," he murmured. "All of this. The growing, the movement, the knowing that we made something together." "You missed more than that," Sable said quietly. "You missed the morning sickness, the cravings, the nights I lay awake terrified that I would have to deliver alone." "I know." His voice was wrecked, "and I will carry that for the rest of my life." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady drumming of hooves and the breathing of wolves. The bond between them hummed with a tentative warmth, not fully healed, not yet, but no longer dying. Sable could feel his emotions bleeding through it. Guilt, heavy as stone. Love, desperate and raw. And a simmering fury directed not at her, but at the man who had orchestrated their separation. Dawn broke as they crested the final ridge above Corvain, and Sable's blood turned to ice. Smoke rose from the capital in thick black columns. The city gates hung open, their iron hinges twisted and broken. The royal banner, the silver wolf on a field of midnight blue, had been torn down from the castle's highest tower. In its place flew the crimson serpent of House Blackthorn. "No," Korith breathed from behind them, having shifted back to human form. They moved faster than we anticipated. Cauldron's arm turned to iron around Sable's waist, a growl built in his chest. Not human, not entirely wolf, but something between the two that vibrated through her spine. "Osric has taken the keep," he said. A scout burst from the tree line, bloodied and wild-eyed. "My king." Blackthorn forces struck at dawn. They had allies inside the guard. Lord Osric has declared himself regent. Nerissa has been proclaimed Luna. The scout's eyes darted to Sable, then away. "There is more. They have seized hostages. 42 members of the household staff who refused to kneel. The kitchen matron. The stable hands. The healer's apprentices who served under the Luna." He swallowed. "They are to be executed at sundown as traitors to the new order." Sable's heart stopped. Maren, the old kitchen matron who had smuggled her extra bread during the first lonely months, who had brushed her hair when homesickness made her weep, who had been the only person in Corvain Keep to remember her birthday, every single year. "We go now," Sable said. Cauldron looked down at her. "Sable, you cannot enter that city. If Osric captures you..." "Maren is in there because of me, because she was loyal to me. I will not hide in the hills while she dies for that loyalty." Cauldron's wolves hit the outer walls like a battering ram forged from fur and fury. Sable watched from the ridge as the assault unfolded. The Alpha King's forces outnumbered the Blackthorn garrison 3-1, and the wolves who had spent 3 months channeling their king's anguish into restless aggression fought with a savagery that shook Corvain's outer walls. The gates fell within the hour. The outer courtyard was secured shortly after. Cauldron fought at the vanguard, his massive wolf form tearing through Blackthorn soldiers with a precision that was less battle and more controlled annihilation. But as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a messenger came scrambling up the ridge, her face ashen. "My lady, Lord Osric has barricaded himself in the great hall with the hostages. He says if the king does not surrender and submit to exile, he will execute them all before sundown, starting with the kitchen matron." Sable closed her eyes. Behind her lids, she saw Marin's weathered face. The woman who had baked a small honey cake every year on the 6th day of the harvest moon and left it outside Sable's chamber door with a note that read simply, "Remembered." She opened her eyes. "Take me to the great hall." The guards Cauldron had posted to protect her exchanged panicked glances. "My lady, the king gave explicit orders." "The king is not the one whose family is about to die in that hall." Sable's voice carried a calm that surprised even her. "Take me down, or I will walk down alone." They took her down. She found Cauldron at the doors of the great hall, his human form restored, blood streaking his bare chest, held back by Korath and 4 of his strongest wolves. The doors were barred from inside. Through the thick oak, Sable could hear weeping. "You cannot go in," Korath was saying. "It is exactly what Osric wants. The moment you surrender, he executes them anyway and claims the throne by right of conquest." "If I do nothing, they die regardless," Cauldron snarled. "Then we find another way." "There is no other way." Sable's voice cut through the argument like a blade. Every wolf turned to look at her. Cauldron's expression cycled through relief, fury, and terror in the space of a single heartbeat. "Sable, what are you doing here? I told you to stay on the ridge. And I told you 3 months ago that I was done being left behind." She placed her hand on his chest, over the scars his wolf had torn into him, and felt his heartbeat hammering beneath her palm. "Osric does not want you, Cauldron. He wants me gone. I am the obstacle to his daughter sitting on your throne. I am the loose thread in his plan. Which is exactly why you should be nowhere near. Which is exactly why I am the only person who can walk through those doors and come out with 42 lives." She held his gaze. "He will trade them for me. You know he will. I will not let you sacrifice yourself." "It is not a sacrifice. It is a choice." Her voice softened, but her eyes did not waver. "You spent 6 years making choices that pushed me into the shadows. Let me step into the light for once. Cauldron, let me show you, and every wolf in this kingdom, what your Luna is made of." Something fractured in Cauldron's expression. Through the bond, she felt his wolf screaming. A sound of primal refusal, every instinct raging against the idea of his pregnant mate walking into an enemy's hands. But beneath the terror, she felt something else. Recognition. The same quality he had fallen in love with the night she pulled him back from death. The absolute, unshakable refusal to let someone die when she had the power to save them. He released a breath that sounded like it tore something out of him. "If he touches you, then you will do what you do best." She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Brief, fierce. A promise and a farewell compressed into a single moment. "Give me 10 minutes, then come for me." She turned to the barred doors before he could argue further. "Lord Osric Blackthorn," she called, her voice ringing off the stone corridor. "I am Sable Renwick, Luna of Corvain, the woman you have spent 6 years trying to erase. I am coming in alone. And I am offering you the only thing you have ever truly wanted, me, in exchange for every innocent life behind those doors." Silence from within. Then the heavy scrape of a bar being lifted. The doors opened to darkness and firelight. Sable stepped through. Behind her, she heard Cauldron's fist strike the wall, heard the strangled sound that escaped his throat. Not a word, not a howl, but something more devastating than either. She did not look back. The great hall of Corvain had been transformed into a slaughterhouse of anticipation. 42 hostages knelt in a line before the dais, bound at the wrists, their faces hollow with exhaustion and terror. Blackthorn soldiers stood behind them with drawn blades, positioned for efficient execution. Torches guttered in iron sconces, casting lurching shadows across the stone. On the throne, Cauldron's throne, sat Lord Osric Blackthorn, his silver hair immaculate, his crimson coat unbuttoned at the throat as if this were a casual supper rather than a coup. Beside him stood Nerissa, draped in the ceremonial white of a Luna, her frozen lake eyes sweeping over Sable with undisguised contempt. "So," Osric said pleasantly, "the healer returns." Sable's gaze found Marin among the hostages. The old woman was bleeding from a cut above her eye, her wrists rubbed raw by the ropes, but her chin was raised in stubborn defiance. When she saw Sable, her expression crumbled. "No, child," Marin whispered. "Not for me. Run." "I am done running." Sable turned to Osric. "Release them, all 42. I am what you want." Osric studied her swollen belly with the dispassionate interest of a man appraising livestock. You and the heirs. Yes, that does simplify things considerably. He waved a hand. Release the prisoners. Secure the girl. Father. Nerissa's voice was sharp. We should kill her now, while we have the chance. Patience, daughter. A dead Luna creates a martyr. A captive Luna creates leverage. Osric's smile did not reach his eyes. Besides, I want Cauldron to know that his mate and his children belong to me now. That is a far more exquisite punishment than a quick death. The hostages were cut free. They stumbled toward the doors, some weeping, some too numb to react. Marin tried to reach Sable, but a soldier shoved her backward into the retreating crowd. Remember! Marin called out as she was pushed through the doors. Remember what you are, child. The doors slammed shut. Sable was alone with the Blackthorns. Rough hands seized her arms. A soldier forced her to her knees before the dais. Osric descended from the throne with measured steps, drawing a short blade from his belt. The same moonsbane-coated silver that his assassins had carried. 6 years of planning, he said conversationally. 6 years of patient, methodical work to remove you from the equation. Tincture in the wine, whispers in the council's ear. Nerissa positioned at every function, every dinner, every opportunity to remind the kingdom that a proper Luna stood ready. He crouched before her. And you almost made it easy. You almost vanished on your own. If only you had stayed gone. Why? Sable asked. All of this, the poisoning, the manipulation, the assassins. Why not simply challenge Cauldron for the throne directly? Osric laughed. Challenge an Alpha King in single combat? I am ambitious, girl, not suicidal. No, the elegant path was always through his mate. Control the bond, control the king. Remove the bond, replace the Luna, and the throne follows. He straightened. Unfortunately, you proved more resilient than anticipated. And now I must take the inelegant path. He raised the blade. Father, wait, Nerissa said, stepping forward. Let me do it. She stole my future. Let me take hers. Osric hesitated, then smiled. Poetic. Very well. He handed the blade to his daughter. Nerissa descended the steps, her white ceremonial gown trailing behind her, the moonsbane knife catching the torchlight. She stopped before Sable and tilted her chin up with one cold finger. You were never worthy of him, Nerissa whispered, a nobody healer from the border camps. You should have stayed in the dirt where you belonged. She raised the blade above her head, and the twins woke up. Not kicked, not shifted. Woke up, as if two small souls had been sleeping through the chaos and chose this precise moment to announce their presence to the world. Power erupted from Sable's belly like a geyser of white fire, blazing through her veins with a force that shattered the ropes binding her wrists and flung Nerissa backward across the dais. Sable cried out, not in fear, in transformation. Her body reshaped itself from the inside, every cell rewriting its purpose, every fiber of her being dissolving and rebuilding into something new. Something magnificent was fighting to emerge. She had never shifted before. In 6 years as Luna, her wolf had remained dormant. A quiet presence she could feel but never reach, locked behind a door she did not know how to open. The tincture, she realized through the blinding agony. Osric's poison had not only dulled Cauldron's bond, it had suppressed her shift entirely. Now, with the poison gone and her children's power blazing through her like a second sun, the door did not open. It exploded. The wolf that emerged was white as winter moonlight, smaller than Cauldron's massive form, but radiating a power that had nothing to do with size. Golden light shimmered beneath her fur as if her blood had turned to sunfire. Her eyes blazed amber, ancient and furious and absolutely certain. Nerissa scrambled to her feet, the moonsbane blade still clutched in her trembling hand. She lunged. Sable caught the blade in her jaws. The moonsbane seared her tongue, and she tasted poison and silver and her own blood. And she did not care. She bit down, The blade snapped like a dry twig. She spat the broken halves at Nerissa's feet. The great hall doors detonated inward. Cauldron's wolf form crashed through the wreckage, 60 royal wolves flooding in behind him. Blackthorn soldiers threw down their weapons. Osric backed toward the throne, his composure finally cracking as 2 wolves, one black as a moonless night, one white as the moon itself, advanced on him from either side. "This is treason," Osric hissed. "The council will—" "The council," Cauldron's voice cut through as he shifted back to human form, "will watch you answer for poisoning their king, attempting to murder their Luna, and staging a coup against the crown." He looked at Sable's wolf form with an expression of staggering awe. "And they will see what I have always known, that the woman I chose is worth more than every noble house in this kingdom combined." Sable shifted back. She stood before the hall, human again, her hand on her belly, breathing hard but unbroken. Nerissa dropped to her knees. Osric's blade clattered from his hand. It was over. They held the trial at dawn. Osric Blackthorn was stripped of his titles, his lands, and his wolf, the most severe punishment their kind could inflict short of death. He would live out his remaining years as a human, denied the shift, denied the bond, denied everything that made their kind whole, a living ghost in a world of wolves. Nerissa was exiled to the frozen reaches beyond the northern border, carrying nothing but the white ceremonial gown she had worn to claim a throne that was never hers. The gown would not keep her warm. That was rather the point. The household staff were freed and honored. Marin was given a seat at the royal table, permanently. And when Sable embraced her, the old woman wept into her shoulder and said, "I baked you a honey cake. It is still in the kitchen. I would not let them throw it away." Sable laughed through her tears. "Of course you did." In the days that followed, the kingdom breathed again. The crops in the eastern provinces, withered under the toxic weight of a poisoned alpha bond, began to push green shoots through the damaged soil. The wolves who had grown erratic and aggressive settled back into their natural rhythms as the true bond between their king and Luna radiated stability through the pack. Sable healed, not just physically, but in the deeper places where 6 years of loneliness had left wounds that no herb could reach. Cauldron was there for every moment, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with the quiet, steady presence she had needed all along. He brought her tea in the morning. He sat with her while she sorted herbs. He rested his hand on her belly each night and spoke softly to the children growing inside her, telling them stories about their mother's courage that made Sable roll her eyes and blush. "You are romanticizing," she told him one evening. "I am documenting," he corrected. "Our children should know that their mother walked into an enemy stronghold alone, offered herself in exchange for 42 lives, then turned into a wolf and bit a sword in half." When you put it that way, it sounds absurd. It sounds like truth, which is often absurd. On the first night of the new moon, they completed the bond. Cauldron bared his throat to her, the ancient gesture of an alpha offering himself to his mate, not as a king to a subject, but as an equal to an equal. Sable pressed her lips to the place where his pulse hammered beneath his skin, and when her teeth broke through, the bond erupted between them with a force that brought them both to their knees. She saw everything, every memory, every sleepless night, every moment he had sat in her empty chamber, pressing his face to her pillow, breathing in a scent that faded a little more each day. She felt his wolf's anguish, the animal screaming inside him, clawing at his ribs, tearing him apart from the inside because its mate was gone, and no amount of power or fury could bring her back. And he saw her. The gallery above the feast hall, watching him laugh while her heart shattered, the 2 candles burning on the windowsill, the long walk to the postern gate, the months of exile, the quiet cottage, the nights she lay awake with her hands on her belly, whispering to his children that their father was a good man, even though she was no longer sure she believed it. The understanding that passed between them was total, complete, devastating in its honesty and healing in its completeness. Never again, Sable whispered against his throat. Never again, he swore. 4 months later, on a morning washed in golden light, Sable gave birth to twins. A boy with his father's dark auburn hair and his mother's healer's hands. A girl with silver-white fur when she shifted, barely an hour old and already wolf. And amber eyes that blazed with an ancient knowing fire. Cauldron held his daughter in one arm and his son in the other, tears streaming freely down his face, and looked at Sable with an expression she had waited 6 years to see. Not duty, not obligation. Not the distracted affection of a king who had somewhere more important to be. Just love. Simple, enormous, undeniable love. "Happy birthday, Sable," he said softly. She smiled. For the first time in 6 years, someone had remembered. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.